there is this place in the ancient world for the exceptional woman. And so, while there might be 1,000 statements about men being, obviously in control, there was always place for the exception. Even Aristotle, who I'm going to quote in a second, who is the one who says the husband is the head of the home about 300 years before Christ, he will say the male is more fit to command than the female, except where there's some deviation of nature. So even Aristotle acknowledges, as hard as he is on women, even Aristotle acknowledges that there are exceptional women who are more fit to lead than men are. Okay, so was female prophecy socially disruptive at Corinth? That's my gambit. That the female prophecy was disruptive in the worship service, and that's why we have these instructions from Paul. Please stop me at any time if you have a comment or a question. 1 Corinthians 11:3. Now I want you to know that the head of a husband is the Christ, and the head of a wife is the husband, and the head of the Christ is God. Now, I've already mentioned this. Does head mean here source, or does head mean authority? And I want to take it on the chin. There are what I call naughty verses in the Bible that don't fit my theology as well as others. I'm not going to try to mince words. I think this must mean authority here. There are passages where headship has more to do with source, but I think that Paul is saying that the Christ is over any man, and the husband is the authority over the woman. Again, my question is whether this is transcultural or whether this is basically the incarnation of the gospel in the first century.
A lot of people tend to review on women in ministry often verses like this, like, man should be head of the household, so therefore women can't be spiritually ahead of him, whatever. But would you say that that'd be kind of an after the fall view, or go back to him?
Well, my approach is to say, you're missing the big picture, not you, but to this person, you're missing the big picture of this chapter. This chapter assumes that women prophesy and assumes that the husband... I don't have to argue away the headship of the husband here to argue for women in ministry, because the chapter is assuming that women are ministering to the congregation here. Now, they don't have senior pastors at this time. They did have elders. Were there ever women in the elders of a church? We don't have any information on that. I mean, so you can't answer it one way or the other definitively. There is no... I mean, Phoebe was a patron of the church of Cenchrea. Does that mean that she was one of the elders? It could have. I mean, you can't disprove it. So it's awfully flimsy ground to say a woman can't be a senior pastor because we have no clear evidence of... I mean, how many elders' names do we know from the ancient? Even in Corinthians, is Stephanus an elder? I'm guessing he was. We don't know that for sure. Was Crispus or Gaius an elder? I mean, it's all guesswork. You can, and it's just awfully flimsy evidence to try to argue against it. Now I know. What was the second thing you said about the pre-fall, post-fall? Certainly, from the perspective of Genesis, that seems to be the case. In other words, the woman. I'm sorry for saying in other words too often. The woman only becomes subject to her husband in Genesis after the fall. That's one of her punishments. Your desire will be to your husband. However, again, I have to take it on the chin. Paul does use birth order here, and 1 Timothy uses birth order to argue for a certain primacy to the man. So I would argue that Paul is probably taking Genesis out of context there, but he's inspired. So I have to take that seriously. But yes, I would say that in Genesis, the woman's desire only becomes to her husband after she sins. There is nothing in the text of Genesis 2 that implies that the woman is subordinate to her husband in my opinion. You might argue the help me thing, I guess, but I know Christina Lascelles-Peterson, who's going to be here next week, I think it is, argues that help me word doesn't, you keep using that word, it doesn't mean what you think it means, that it's not, doesn't imply subordination. You want to follow up? No. So, Sarah?
I just have a question. You're talking about how headship has to do with authority rather than the source.
Well, it's a both and, but I think that this passage is primarily talking about authority, probably.
Okay, well, how would you interpret verses 11 and 12 then? I mean, I don't know Greek, so I don't.
When we get to the woman the man is not independent of the woman, or that kind of verse?
Yeah, it says they're neither independent.
Yeah, I see Paul bringing balance to the force there. So many of these things, to some extent, we are hampered by the fact that we don't know exactly what situation Paul is addressing. And there are many comments that if you remove them from their context, they sound a lot different than they would sound in their context. If that makes any sense. So some of Paul's words, I mean, there's a woman who's written a book, Antoinette Wire, called The Corinthian Women Prophets, in which she basically argues that Paul was a misogynist who hated women. I don't think that's true. But the problem, since we can't see the women he's addressing, we don't know the exact tone of passages like this. Let me just give another example from things we've already covered. In 1 Corinthians 6, where Paul says, don't take each other to court, that passage will take on completely different tones depending on who's taking who to court about what. I have an 8-year-old and a 9-year-old, and I may deal more harshly with my 9-year-old son doing the same thing that if my 8-year-old daughter did it, I might not speak as harshly to her. And the reason is not because I love her more than my son. It's because he's different than her, and he's like me. He's got it just doesn't get through. Hello, McFly. He almost requires you sitting down and saying, "Get off of the roof," or whatever. He doesn't do that, but he because of who he is, he requires a different tactic to get him to the same place as her. What I'm arguing here is that to some extent, the what you see is what you get approach to the Scripture is really bound to twist even what it meant originally when we don't know what exactly Paul is addressing. It may very well be that these are very rebellious women who are wanting to divorce their husbands, or we don't know exactly who these people are that he's addressing. And if at times he sounds hard, it may very well be that the people that he's dealing with are needing a kind of a firm hand. That's why I think we need more than just the Scripture. And I know I'm sounding heretical here, but we need more than just the Scripture to make these kinds of decisions, because to some extent, the original meaning of the Scripture is something we simply can't access completely. We cannot know the whole story of what this verse is saying. And often to lift verses like this out of the Bible and treat them as philosophical statements is to twist them from what their original connotations and tone actually was. Anyway, ponder or not, let me move on. Okay, Aristotle's Politics. I wanted to